Gaston.
Mr. Speaker, I am shocked that these regulations have been brought before the Assembly today. I am equally shocked that the Executive agreed to sign them off, regardless of when that was. Since Stormintor's return, there have been a growing number of intelligent voices who have questioned whether we have the competence to govern. I am deeply concerned that these regulations today give credence to those who suggest that we do not. Although I believe there is a sensible way forward, which I will set out, it is only possible to sensibly engage with these regulations before us today, which increases stakes and prizes, by standing back to ask the question: knowing what we know about Northern Ireland today, is increasing the stakes and prizes an appropriate step to take? In 2016, the Department of Communities conducted the only comprehensive problem gambling prevalence survey that they have, to my knowledge, undertaken. It demonstrated a problem gambling rate that was not just twice that of England, or 3 times that of England, or even 4 times that of England. Members, it was 5 times that of England. In other words, the people of Northern Ireland, our constituents, were 5 times more likely to suffer from gambling harm than people in England. Since that time, the UK Government has conducted a further problem gambling prevalence survey, demonstrating that problem gambling in England has deteriorated further. In this context, if we are to act responsibly, unless and until we have robust data to the contrary, we must adopt the precautionary principle and assume that things have similarly deteriorated here in Northern Ireland. In this context, what do these regulations do? Today you have the opportunity to go into a bingo hall or licensed amusement premises and you can spend 30 pence on a gaming machine to play the game once, with the enticement of the probability that you might win £25. It was in that context that our problem gambling prevalence figures were 5 times worse than those of England. Yet today we are asked to sweep that away so that vulnerable people in our constituencies can go into a bingo club or licensed premises and spend £2 on a gaming machine to play it once, with the enticement of winning £500. So the amount you can pay increases by a factor of well over 6, while the enticement to do so increases by a factor over 20. This is revolutionary. It is not a far-off event. Article 1 states that this order shall come into operation on the day after the day on which it is affirmed by resolution of the Assembly. In plain English, if we vote for these changes today, they will come into effect tomorrow. By Friday, you may find yourself confronting the socially destructive implications of permitting a dramatic increase in stakes and prizes. Members will do so against the backdrop of knowledge that the last time the Department looked at this issue, we found that our problem gambling figures, on the basis of the old stakes and prizes, not the new ones, remember, were 5 times that of England. Let's not forget, research demonstrates that gambling machines are 10 times more likely to be located in deprived areas. You might be happy to go to bed tonight having voted for that, but I certainly am not. Now, of course, I know the Minister's justification is that the Department conducted a consultation, in response to which consultees said that the stakes and prizes should be brought into line with those of Great Britain. Some might say, is it not odd that I, as a unionist, should oppose this? Members, competent government requires us to have the capacity to have regard for more than one thing at a time, and there are 2 additional considerations that we need to keep in view in coming to a proper view of these regulations here today. In the first instance, it is important to remember that Northern Ireland is unlike Great Britain because it does not have a dedicated gambling commission, and the levels of protection afforded people in Northern Ireland are much less. In this context, it makes no sense to expose the people of Northern Ireland to a higher level of risk, as in GB, when the people of Northern Ireland are not also afforded the same levels of protection. In the second instance, those responding to the consultation did not just say that the stake and prizes should be in line with those in Great Britain. They also said that the gambling industry should pay a levy to help those suffering from gambling harm. Indeed, it is very striking that support for increased stakes and prizes at 65% was less than the support for a gambling levy at 84%. On the 5th of April, the Great Britain gambling levy regulations will come into effect, taking monies from the gambling industry to pay for the socially destructive implications of gambling. Thus, while the GB rates applied in the regulations before us today will be provided in the context of the protection afforded by the Gambling Commission and the gambling levy, bringing in between 90 and 100 million per annum, neither will be the case here in Northern Ireland. Now, before someone interrupts me to tell me about Section 15 of our 2022 Gambling Act that makes provision for such a levy, let me remind the House of two critical limitations. In the first instance, no levy has been brought forward in Northern Ireland yet because the Minister has not commenced the power, let alone sought to use it. The 2022 Act states at Section 17(3), Sections 7, 13, 15 and 16 come into operation on such day or days as the Department for Communities may by order appoint. To date, the Department has not by order appointed the day on which Section 15 comes into operation, let alone produce regulations on the basis of it. In the second instance, the Section 15 levy is completely unlike the GB levy because it only pertains to certain forms of terrestrial gambling and does not engage with online gambling at all. If we aspire to govern competently, we must recognise that we cannot blindly seek to bring the risks facing those vulnerable to gambling harm in Northern Ireland into line with the risks experienced in Great Britain when we know full well that the people of Northern Ireland do not enjoy the same protections. Not only that, but Northern Ireland's people are about to be subject to less protections from the 5th of April on account of the GB gambling levy. Some might like to stick their heads in the sand and pretend that the only relevant point of comparison is stakes and prizes, but the public know that isn't true. What are we going to do about it? I propose that, at the very least, rather than voting to expose some of the most vulnerable people in our society to greater vulnerability tomorrow, that we have reason to believe that they are already 5 times more vulnerable than those in England, that we should not pass this legislation today. I propose that we keep it back, and if it is to pass, we only do so at such a time that we can be sure that the people of Northern Ireland are afforded at least the same levels of protection as those of GB. At the very least, we should wait until the Minister has commenced Section 15 of the 2022 Act and developed the regulations to give effect to our gambling levy. He could then return to the House with these regulations and the gambling levy regulations in the same day. Until that time, it would be grossly irresponsible for this House to vote on these regulations, let alone approve them.